Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. And this week I have a good friend with me who is a licensed social worker, and she's also the director of Connect One Child, Christy Goodwin. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us, Christy, what you got going on? What you doing these days, and how's life?
Right. So as you mentioned, I'm the director of Connect One Child. I'm a social worker by trade. And I've been in the field for over 20 years, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. And Connect One Child is part of the Louisiana Baptist Children's Home. And so we are their off-campus foster care and adoption ministry. And I've had a heart for foster care and adoption for, I would say, the last 10 to 12 years have just been really, it started off with just doing some work for private adoption, doing home studies, and doing some counseling with birth mothers that were considering surrendering their parental rights.
Oh, wow.
And after that, it led to my husband and I becoming foster parents while we were in New Orleans for a season. And so that opened us up to just a different layer of, just experience with children that are from hard places. And at the time that we were moving away from New Orleans, this job opened up with the children's home for me to step into the Connect One Child role as a foster care and adoption specialist. So basically recruiting foster parents from churches and working with churches to develop foster care ministry, walk-in foster parents through the certification process, and then most importantly, offering them support as they foster.
Yeah.
Because it's quite a journey. It's, a lot of difficulties that come when you're parenting children who have experienced some of the traumas that the children in the system have been through.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, that was one of the reasons I wanted you to come on was, we met, what do you mean, 10 years ago, 12 years ago now? Yeah.
At least.
Was that doing the group? Is that when we met? When you
Yes, with the hub.
Yeah,
yes.
So the Hub Urban Ministry is a ministry in town that Christy used to do some hours for and help with homeless doing Celebrate Recovery.
Yes.
And so I think when I got my license and started working for the Methodist Children's Home at the time, was that when were y'all moving, or you were just handing it off because you were busy? I can't remember.
I handed that off because we were moving to New Orleans.
That's right. Okay.
Right.
So that was before the move. And Trey, your husband, he went to seminary? Is that
yes.
what? Okay.
Yes, he did. He was a non-traditional student, went later in life. Yeah. And so we moved down to New Orleans at the beginning of 2014.
Yeah. So where are you from originally?
Shreveport.
Okay. So you're from Shreveport. What made you want to get your social working license? How'd that happen?
So in college, I really enjoyed sociology classes. When I initially went to college, I wanted to be a dentist of all things.
Really?
And then, failed biology. I didn't fail it, but almost.
Same.
And realized that was not for me.
I was going to do radiology technician because I was like, how can I get out of school quickly and make good money? And then I failed biology and chemistry. And I was like, okay, this is not my thing.
Maybe not the best fit. Right. So I took my first sociology class, and I really enjoyed it and was just intrigued. I minored in psychology. And I think around my junior year was when I discovered social work as a profession.
Yeah.
And so, went straight from college to get my master's at Stephen F. Austin in Texas. And there just, really enjoyed just the perspective. With social work, the field is so wide, you can work in almost any environment. And so I love that there's so many different opportunities and ways that you can use those skills.
And you have your clinical? Yeah, LC?
I do.
Yeah,
LCSW.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
What that means for layman people is you get your MSW, and then you get your license as a social worker, and then you work and get a bunch of hours to get your clinical license so you can do even more stuff.
Right. Last year, I got my BACS, Board Approved Clinical Supervisor.
Oh,
so
nice.
I'm able to supervise social workers who are working on their clinical license.
Oh, that's great
now.
to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know. I've been thinking about getting this LPC supervisor thing forever. I just never taken the time.
Right.
I need to.
You got a lot going on.
Yeah, a little bit. The Lord will direct me when he wants me to do something like that. Okay, so how did your faith play into that? Kind of how did you become a Christian, and then how did that play into social work?
Yeah, I think that definitely the Lord has been present in all of that. I remember as a teenager going on a youth trip. We went to Centrifuge, but one year we went to Mission Fuge.
Okay.
And we were in Memphis, and I remember that was, I grew up a very sheltered, young woman. And
Your parents were Christian?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
Raised in a Christian home and in church 3 times a week.
Right.
Just very grounded and rooted in the church. And I became a Christian at age 15. And I remember going to Mission Fuge, and we worked with just some at-risk children that were in Memphis. And I remember just the Lord stirring in my heart, just a desire to serve in that way, in a helping profession. My mom was a teacher. She always discouraged me from going that route, just based on,
All the hardships.
Hardships. However, she was an amazing teacher. And, social work just seemed like the Lord at that time was even preparing my heart just with compassion and empathy and a desire, just to serve others.
Isn't it crazy to look back on, how the Lord just plants those little seeds and puts you that's such an encouragement for people to remember to send their kids on mission trips, to make sure that during junior high and high school, there's some of the prime ways in which the Lord will show a people group or show a group, that, man, you would never see or run into unless you do those kind of things.
Right. And a lot of times it's as much of a blessing, when you're participating in it, right?
Always, yeah. Yeah, I always feel like every mission trip I go on, you leave being like, oh, I got so much more out of that than I gave.
Yes.
Yeah, that's most service things, right?
Right.
Yeah, I would say our career is some of that. It's hard and you give a lot, but if you look at the totality of it, you get a lot. The Lord shapes you in the gift of like growing closer to Him through the suffering and through the growth and pains. Like it's all worth it. I sometimes wonder how other people, not that it doesn't matter, but it's like, some days I wish I mowed grass every day. But then I think I'd be crazy after 2 days of mowing grass.
Right.
We all have our gifting.
Yes.
All right. So faith kind of played into it, go on a mission trip. See, this is kind of where the Lord starts to sprinkle that in. Go to school, graduate, and y'all lived in Shreveport and you did social working the whole time?
We did, yes. And so I started my career off doing medical social work.
Okay.
So,
and who was that for?
So my first job was with a dialysis clinic.
Oh, really?
Right.
Fresenius or something like that?
DCI.
DCI, yeah. Okay.
Shout out DCI.
JC was a dietitian for DCI.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So I started off there and then went from there to, I did hospice social work for a little while. I did a little bit of VA working with, veterans with PTSD. And
all the easy stuff.
Right. Did school social work for a few years. I really enjoyed that. And then was presented with an opportunity to begin doing some contract work for an adoption agency, doing adoption home studies. And at that point, that was really when, the Lord would stir in my heart to really, get involved in that sort of work with children. I had shied away from that earlier in my career because I felt like the stories were going to be too difficult to bear and to shoulder some of that that secondary trauma that we talk about.
Get,
right. Yeah. And at that time, I think the Lord was using those first 10 years of my career just to strengthen me and teach me a lot.
That's amazing.
Right. And so, at that time, the Lord just graciously just opened door after door. And what started off as just private adoption work, turned into foster care work, which to me, there's just evidence of the gospel is just everywhere, right? I mean, when we look at these children who, in a perfect world, they would have experienced love and care from a caring adult, and our world is broken. And so, these kids have experienced and walked through really horrible, horrific things. And the fact that there's, healing and restoration that can be brought into their lives through loving, Christ-centered caregivers, that to me is just such a picture of the gospel and just that redemption and that Christ offers us. And just to be a small part of that story it's really incredible and humbling.
Absolutely. It is when having your own kids, right, is like the first step of really understanding how much God loves you, and people can't. And so what a beautiful opportunity for people who can't have children, for people who, their own biological children who, learn to love a child, and that is their child. And they learn that, man, I remember having Jude, my second kid, and thinking, how can I ever love something as much as I love this first kid?
Yes.
And then God expands your heart. And,
yes.
I'm sure it's the same way with foster and adoption. It's like, sure, it's hard. There's difficulty. There are barriers. It's a different thing. And yet God, when he adopts us into his family and we are his own, it's such a beautiful picture of the gospel.
It really is.
So, and you have 2 boys?
2 boys and a daughter.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I forget about the girl because I'm used to my 2 boys.
Right. She's the baby.
Yeah, she's the tail in the caboose.
She's not spoiled at all.
No, I bet she's not. So, and you guys started fostering yourself in the middle of helping other people. Is that what happened?
So there was a little caveat in that story. So while when we moved down to New Orleans, the plan was for me to work full time.
Okay.
And to basically help, put my husband through school. And clearly that was just not the Lord's plan for us. So I applied for a few jobs and did not get them. And one of the jobs was ironically very closely related to the work that I'm doing now. And so the Lord guided us toward a season of me homeschooling our kids.
Okay.
And so during that season was when the Lord opened up my eyes to just the need for foster parents. I actually began, of all things, I was volunteering at the nursery at First Baptist New Orleans and working in the baby room. And I remember there was one family that it seemed like every other week they were bringing in a different kiddo. Mm-hmm. And so just in talking to the mom, just realized they were foster parents and realizing how many placements were coming through their home, it just struck me how great the need was. And at that point, the Lord moved my husband's heart as well. And then we began the certification process of becoming foster parents. And so that was in 2017 when we began that procose.
And so you had 2 kids at that time? Is that how old
we had 3.
You had all 3 of them? Okay.
We had 3. They were...
how old's your oldest?
He's 14.
Oh my
so
gosh.
Now they're...
I forget how much older.
Right.
Those 4 years make a big difference.
So when we fostered, they were 7, 5, and 2.
Okay.
So things were a little crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Lord, the
Lord is good.
Yeah, it's never a good time.
Right. Exactly. If we wait for the perfect time, it won't happen.
It won't ever happen.
Right.
Yeah, it's been, as a clinician, seeing and working with families who foster and adopt or, special needs, those are always the gifts for me is to walk them through and listen and carry that burden and see the good and the bad and the ugly. And there's always so much more good. Mm-hmm. It's hard. It's a very special, unique job. Mm-hmm. But I think I'd also challenge the Crawfords. I had them on a couple years ago. Yes. And Aaron always says, people will be like, y'all are just special people. And he's always like, no, we're the same normal person as you. You can do it too.
Right.
And that stat that I think is always interesting is like in Louisiana, I think it's still the case that there are more churches in Louisiana than kids that need to be fostered and adopted.
Yes.
Is that still the stat?
Yes, there's about the same.
Yeah.
If you look at all the churches that are in the state,
which is
represents about the number of children that are in foster care.
Yeah, it's wild to think if one family from each one of those churches would foster, there would be no kids that need a home.
Yes.
So my challenge to people as they listen to this is, not everybody has to foster, not everybody has to adopt, but if the Lord is calling you to that, or just by listening to this podcast, you're realizing, man, that's a need or something that we could facilitate, please reach out and I'm sure your organization helps people with all that stuff.
Right. And, and I encourage, if that's something that God is putting on your heart, to just pray about it. Ask the Lord to guide you in that. We've had many families that will come to us and we'll find out that they've wrestled with it in prayer, for months, even years, and how God just repeatedly led them to scriptures that, that confirm God's heart for the vulnerable. I had one family say they couldn't find any scripture to discourage them
that's good.
From getting into, becoming a foster parent. And I think that speaks volumes. I really think it lines up with
Absolutely. Yeah,
the gospel.
We seek wise counsel. Go to your counselor, go to your pastor, talk through those things, pros and cons.
Yes.
We're not supposed to make these decisions in a vacuum.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super important. Okay, so that leads me to just the conversation about you get into Connect One Child. So how has that been? What do you do there? And then we'll get into TBRI a little bit.
Okay, so with Connect One Child, we recruit foster families from churches.
Okay.
And so we hold monthly meetings. They're called foster parent orientation meetings. So it's basically your entry point into foster care in Louisiana.
Got it.
It's a course approved by the state. With Connect One Child, we're able to offer some faith-based, scripture and information to the presentation.
And that's a nonprofit? Connect One Child?
It's part of Louisiana Baptist Children's Home.
That's right. That's
yes.
right. Okay.
And so, we offer those monthly orientation meetings, and they, you learn there what the basic requirements are for becoming a foster parent. And then at that point, we help you get enrolled into the 8-week training course, the foster parent training course. We're able to do home studies. All of our social workers are able to do home studies for the prospective foster families. And, we do a pretty comprehensive home study. We're really looking, with the adults in the home at just, their mental health. Have they looked at their own attachment and really, assess that to see what they're bringing to the table when bringing in children in their home that have experienced trauma. We're looking at their support system as well. Are they going to be well supported? And that's so important because did you know 30 to 50% of foster parents quit within the first year?
Wow, I did not.
Right. And so we just want, with Connect One Child, we want our families to be just well supported, well informed, so that they can foster for as long as the Lord calls them to and as long as they feel equipped to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge task, but I do think that, like many things, like half of marriages, don't make it either.
Right.
It's like, well, why is that? And so much of it is the lack of premarital counseling and the lack of preparation and awareness and what are you going to be in and what's going to happen and what supports do you have and what nobody does
Right.
that.
Right.
It's a very low number of people who actually go to premarital counseling, and so we wonder. Yes, marriage is hard. Yes, fostering is hard. But I think we make it a lot more difficult when we don't do any kind of communal support before. I think that's where you guys, come in huge.
Yeah.
Are there avenues where that doesn't happen? Like, how do people foster outside of those type of organizations? Like, can a person just go, you know what, I don't want to do all that prep work and heavy? Is that part of the problem that Connect One Child's trying to fill?
So foster parents can be certified directly through DCFS. That's Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services. Yeah. And so they can be certified directly through them. All of our families are also certified through DCFS. They do have an extra layer of support through Connect One Child. However, as far as the foster parent training classes and orientation, the home study, all those are required no matter which way you go about it.
So what's the benefit? What's the pro of doing it through Connect One Child versus doing it on your own?
So through Connect One Child, we offer our families more information on trauma. We have all of our families read The Connected Child. We want them to have a good understanding of attachment and trust-based relational intervention and some strategies and things like that they can implement with kids in their care. We also have them identify. They have to ask several people in their lives to support them as they foster. And if you know foster parents, it's pretty hard for most of them to ask for help. A lot of them are naturally helpers themselves.
Yep.
And that's an exercise on the front end of them having to reach out and ask others to support them. And we call them family partners, and we train their family partners on different ways that they can practically support families as they foster. A lot of times friends and family just don't really understand all the ins and outs of what's involved, and so therefore they're not really sure how to help when things get difficult. So that's another benefit. And then most importantly, we offer monthly contact and continued contact with all of our Connect One Child foster and adoptive families. And so we're able to support them. They'll, whether face to face or on the phone, or, we'll consult with them on different things that they're dealing with children in their care. Sometimes it's grief when placements leave, just addressing the unique aspects of foster care and, covering them with just clinical knowledge and prayer and, and just encouraging them. We always like to remind them of what brought them into this space in the first place. A lot of times they can find strength from what led them to this place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can help sustain them through the difficult times. In foster care, a lot of people don't realize this, but when children are in foster care, children have different caseworkers that are responsible for their cases. So for a foster parent, what that means is that you don't have one particular caseworker that you're working with throughout your foster journey. And with Connect One Child, you do have that consistency of that one person that's followed you from the beginning of the journey throughout your fostering journey to offer support.
Yeah, I've never really thought about that. That's like having, 10 coaches, you're trying to sharpen some skills and get around something in sports, and yet you have this wide variety of people that keep changing out, and they got to get to know you again, and they got to get to know the situation again.
Right.
Super important for them to have one person who kind of sees the whole narrative.
Right. And I love that, whenever we do the home study and do family partner training, we are able to meet their support system. And so later when things get tough, we can remind them, of those supports that they have and encourage them in that way, which is really special.
Yeah. I mean, it's also using the body of Christ for what it's made to be, the different parts and the different personalities and different supports and temperaments, and, be able to say, hey, your uncle's really good at this. Remember when we talked to him, could you use him for this resource or whatever?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's super, super important.
Yeah.
You talked about trauma. I think it's interesting, we'll talk about TBRI because I think it's really important. But it is funny. I was talking to were you there when I came to Broadmoor and Judge Matlock was there?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
He embarrassed me so much. But, we were talking about afterwards just how it's so crazy to look up. I moved back from California in 2010. Mm-hmm. So that was 15 years ago, right? Yep.
Doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
I know, it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So 15 years ago. And I was working for the Methodist Children's Home, so kind of the, whatever sister company of, whatever, doing the same kind of things. And I was doing counseling, helping with, foster care, adoption, in-home placement, all those kind of things, working with kids that were at risk to getting taken out. So I was always at the juvenile court. And trauma was just like not talked about. Mm-hmm. I would go up there would be 60 people sitting out, moms and dads and kids sitting in the hall of the juvenile court, and I would be there with my client going, okay, let's figure out how to advocate, let's work. And I would be the only clinician there. Mm-hmm. And they all had therapists, and they might have happened to not be there. And this is not patting me on the back. I just didn't know anything different.
Right.
It's like these people are not going to advocate for themselves. They don't know what they're supposed to be asking. And so it was I did that for 4 years, and it was such a learning opportunity of like, what's the system like? What's it like to go before the judge with consequences? What's it like when moms or dads causing the problems, and yet the kid's the identified patient? Mm-hmm. And, there was very few people trained in EMDR, and TBRI was definitely not a thing. Mm-hmm. And I remember Judge Matlock and I and Judge Young at the time, and I can't remember African-American judge, female, I can't remember her name.
Oh, Jones?
Yes.
Casey Jones?
Yes.
Okay.
And, just going back and forth and being like, well, hold on, da-da-da-da, and then going behind the bench and like having discussion. And then just seeing where we've come in 15 years in Shreveport with trafficking, with foster care, with Star Court, like with,
It's astounding.
It's crazy,
It's so great.
It is. I mean, I just feel like the Holy Spirit, in seeing where we were just 15 years ago to now, like God has done a huge work in Shreveport and Bossier, in people's hearts and in their minds and in families. And so I say that to just say, man, thank you for your work. And, if Judge Matlock's listening to this, thank you for listening. And now he's like, ride or die on the trauma stuff.
Yes. And his impact is huge.
Oh my gosh.
As the secretary of the state
which is
Child
crazy.
Welfare Agency.
Yes, like to see him move from where he was all the way to now.
Yes.
It's just, God is just so good. And like you said, like being a tiny part of that in all of our little ways and seeing the body come together for these families, man, what a picture of the gospel.
Right.
And it's like, man, I say that to say I'm not saying I did a lot, but it's like you can make a difference. Like
Yes.
just by having a conversation and advocating for somebody, God can use you to plant seeds and to open eyes and hearts and ears, and he's doing it, but you get to be a part of it. And you get to look up and go, look at the kids that I've fostered, or look at the people I've counseled, or look at the lives that have changed by just kind of being a squeaky wheel and pointing some things out.
Right. Yeah. I love that scripture in the New Testament about, Paul watered and Apollos, planted, but, God gives the growth. And
That's right.
And that's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about, now that it's a robust worldview, tell me about TBRI and what that is and kind of how that's used.
So TBRI, it stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And so it was developed out of TCU. It's called the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. But the late Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross developed this. It's an attachment-based and trauma-informed caregiving method.
So talk about attachment for a second. Give me just a general, what is attachment for the average person? Why is that important?
Right. Okay. So attachment, that's in childhood, our attachment to our caregiver. And so are you basically, when you look at children, have their needs been met?
These are emotional, physical,
spiritual. Yes. So, with children, they're not able to self-regulate. They, in those first years of life, they depend on an adult to regulate, all of those things. And so, that secure attachment is where there is trust. Trust is a foundation. And so it is knowing that there is, safety and trust in that relationship.
Yeah. I remember going to so many meetings, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when everybody started going to the TCU thing and trying to figure it out.
Yes.
And, Judge Matlock would just have meeting after meeting and who wants to sign up. And I remember people coming back after like the first couple of trainings and being like, these kids are very unique and they've been harmed and they come from hard places, and TBRI helps you to really work with them. And I remember just raising my hand and being like, shouldn't we just do that for all kids?
Yes.
So how do you feel about that? Like, do you see that pattern where people forget that like the average kid needs attachment and trust-based relational intervention?
I think that we're getting there though.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Right. I know. I remember, my first experience, and actually I had read Connected Child and I knew a lot about TBRI. And it's based on 3 principles, connecting, empowering, and correcting. We want to focus mainly on connecting. And, at that time, I was homeschooling, but I was also a tutor in our little homeschool co-op. And there was a child who was having a hard time regulating himself. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to try this little technique from the Connected Child, a TBRI technique, and see how it plays out, and used it with a normally developed child, and playful engagement. He responded beautifully. And, just with that playful engagement, you could just see his little shoulders drop and just a smile crept across his face. And for me, that was the buy-in.
Oh, I bet.
This is designed for any children.
For humans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the cool thing when you look at scripture. There's been so much damage done by the heavily focus on behavior modification. Don't drink, don't cuss, don't let your kids act out, don't let them run around and have fun, because that's disobedient.
Yes.
And again, I'm a huge fan of obedience to God. Like, we need to be obedient. But I think we've, in between not understanding the science and the biology and seeing people as human beings that God has made and wired, we, for several generations, kind of lost that idea. And it's beautiful to see that counselors and the social working field and people are going, no, look, we have to connect first. We have to build trust first before any of this behavior modification is going to last. And also, sure, if you beat your kid or scream at them or shame them, you'll change their behavior. But what's happening to their heart?
Right.
And so then we label certain kids as special needs, or they need extra love and care. But these kids, they're fine if you just keep doing the thing that you were doing. And I think we're finally seeing that that's not right.
Right.
But it's been an interesting decade.
And TBRI stresses to look at it, is this willful disobedience, or is this a child trying to get their needs met in the only way that they know how?
Yeah. So explain the difference in that.
So, willful disobedience would be just looking at a child who, let's say you have a child who throws a toy at another child and yells. So you may look at that and just say, he's just being bad.
Right.
Right. That could be when you're looking at it through the lens of willful disobedience. Through a TBRI lens, you might look at that situation. You might get, the child that threw the toy, you may get eye level with them and, may put a healthy touch, a hand on their shoulder with permission, of course, and ask, hey, buddy, what do you need? What do you need right now? I see you're upset. And so it is being able to look at the child. You want to look at the child and know that they're precious, right? You don't want to lose sight of the child's preciousness. And I think that's a really important characteristic of TBRI, because when you are continually mindful that God made that child and that child is precious, then you're able to really connect with their heart, and not look at it as a behavior-driven relationship.
Yeah, but Christy, kids are just not supposed to throw toys, so you got to stop it, right?
All right. Good luck with that.
That's right. My favorite example is the toddler who is sitting in the high chair and they're picking their spaghetti up off the tray and dropping it. Which is maddening as a parent. You're like, gosh, it's inconvenient. It's annoying.
Yes.
And yet every kid from about 10 months to 13 months does that same thing.
Yes.
And so you'll have parents who go, well, we need to discipline this out of them, right? We need to correct the behavior. And yet if you'll just connect and redirect over the next 3 months, like most 6-year-olds aren't picking their food up and dropping it off of the table.
Yes.
Right? Like it's a developmental thing that all kids do and that will go away, but you don't not redirect it.
Right.
And I think we find this balance where TBRI helps really well to go keep the thing the center.
Right. And I think with TBRI, there's a misconception that it's, that all about gentle parenting, right? Yeah. And I think that, when you research TBRI, no, there's a healthy balance of nurture and structure, right? And so it's also using, sometimes, it's leveling your, engagement at the situation at hand. And so behavior does have to be addressed.
100%.
Right? And so I think that TBRI
you can't let them
does a
keep
good
throwing
job
the
at
car.
balance. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Some other little toddler's got a,
yes.
cut on their head from this kid who throws the car every day. But it's asking those deeper questions of why is he throwing the car?
Right.
And I think educating the public on human development and child development and like what, that yes, there is sin, there is like this anger, there is selfishness, but also there's a trying to get a need met.
Yes.
And what does that need? And
Right.
I've seen a lot of that in bullying. We've had a really bad culture in bullying way before the smartphone came around. And now we have, it's worse.
It's worse.
Yeah. But it's like, okay, well, why are kids bullying is the question. And if we never can meet with that kid one-on-one and figure out what needs they're trying to, get met, then we just punish them and we never fix the problem.
Without getting to the root.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think TBRI is one of those, obviously they did a really good job of working through it, teaching parents how to do it, and applying it really well. But you're right. I think people hear therapeutic terms and they hear, get down on your kid's level and connect and breathe and what do parents struggle with that with? Like, what do you see that being hard for?
I think it's being proactive versus reactive. And I think, in our culture, we want things solved right away. And with TBRI, this is a lifestyle. This is not just something you can pull out of your back pocket, and do, when it feels right. This is it's a lifestyle. And so it's encouraging parents that it's worth it, that it will be more work on the front end. I know there are examples in my own life where, with my children, trying to think of 2 appropriate choices to give them in the moment.
Yeah.
That's hard sometimes,
Absolutely.
right? We have our mind on other things, and to stop, and mindfulness is a big part of that, of being fully present. And so, I think when we just help caregivers understand how important that is to be, fully engaged and present in that moment, it pays off in dividends, because you can, if you deal with some of these things when the children are young, then you're going to see some fruits of that in progress when they're teenagers.
Absolutely.
Right. And even as adults, because the goal of this is for these children to use these skills, to be adults who can give care, receive care, negotiate their needs, be autonomous, all those sorts of things that we all want.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point, because it's like emotional intelligence is something that we have skipped, again, several generations. We're so focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic, and nobody's teaching anybody how to like manage their breath or their emotions or what their emotions even are. You know? So TBRI like definitely, helps parents learn themselves. And so how much of that work is the parent having to learn how to, regulate?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot of the parent. And so in that it's being mindful, being self-aware. We joke sometimes parents need the time in,
Exactly.
So sometimes parents need to take a step back and practice some square breathing or calming strategies that they can use so that they can be fully present and engage with their children. And one thing I love about TBRI, the late Dr. Karen Purvis has a quote that it's better to rupture and repair than to never err at all. And I love that, because we all know we're not perfect parents, right? But sometimes we can still kind of think that we're doing pretty okay, right? And there are going to be times when we mess up with our kids who are normally developed, kids with special needs, kids who have experienced trauma. We're all going to mess up. However, when we use that opportunity to come back and ask for forgiveness, repair that rupture, that relationship will be stronger because of that.
Absolutely. I talk about this in the book, but authenticity breeds safety.
Yes.
Not perfection.
Right.
Like none of us like perfect people. There was only one, because we know they're not real.
Yes.
So if somebody, a parent, a friend, a spouse, coworker, never has any problems, everything's always great, they're never wrong, we start getting real, like, who is this person and what's going on with them? Because it feels disingenuous, which is dangerous.
Right.
When you can't predict what someone's going to do, our nervous systems go, this person's not trustworthy. And so I think as parents, a lot of times we think, well, or as Christians, I've got to be perfect and magnify perfection to my kids, and I've got to be perfectly consistent, or they're never going to listen to me. I got to be a Christian who never sins, or they're never going to believe in the gospel. When in both scenarios, the opposite is true. The gospel is you're not perfect and you need a savior. That's good news.
Exactly.
And that same thing plays in foster care with people with kids with trauma and adoption and your own kids. If you can come from authenticity, like, hey, I don't have all this figured out. I don't know what to do every time. I tell the boys all the time, like, it's the first time I've parented a 10-year-old.
Yes.
Please, I need you to give me some grace. Like, things have changed. Let me reevaluate for a second. I forgot you're not 5, whatever. And that for them is like, oh, okay, it's better for them to know daddy doesn't have it all figured out, but someone does, and I'm going to work really hard to grow and learn and, find that out, and we'll do that together.
Yes, and it's modeling for them how to ask for help when they need it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if I never have any needs because I've got it all together and, yet subtly I'm kind of making them responsible for my needs, which is the interesting part of the attachment failure in people is I'm perfect. I got to do all this right. But also, you need to behave so I feel okay.
Yes.
How do you see that play out?
Yes. I do see, I see that some. I think that we're moving away from that, which is really good.
Well, especially the people coming to you.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Especially in the foster care world. It's not only, and I'll say this, it's not only dealing with trauma that the children are experiencing, but it's also, there are hurts and traumas that come from simply interacting with the system. It's a difficult system. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of a child coming into your life and you having no idea how long that child will stay with you. Living in that unknown from day to day, it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Extremely difficult. And so I think that can play out as well, not just in caring for the children, but also, being compassionate with themselves, with the other professionals that the foster parents are working with too.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, way that those particular things really, like foster care, adoption, they really bring out humanity and lay it all kind of bare.
Yes.
Where it's heavy, you're giving to someone, you're sacrificing, I put quotes there, you're sacrificing something for this kid, and yet you realize real quickly how much you have are filled with the Spirit and have like God's strength and energy with you, or how much you're relying on yourself and doing this for a need. And if you're doing that, then it's going to go badly really quickly.
Right.
And it typically does in all of our lives, in our marriages, with our kids, where so much, you talked about co-regulation earlier. So many of us, I think as the generation, I'm 42, it's like so many of us, me and older and a little bit younger, we never had the word trauma growing up. Like there was no understanding of attachment. That's a relatively new thing. Like we talked about 15 years ago, nobody was talking about that in our field. And yet now, if you don't know how to do that, it's like, well, you need to go to this training. But my point is that if we look at that as a society, what that means is that most of the adults who are trying to work never had good attachment and don't know how to regulate themselves.
Yes.
And so they can't co-regulate children.
Yes.
They're getting super dysregulated because their kid's upset or sad or failing or suffering. And what that means is that their identity, their worth and value, their security is tied into this external thing. And they're still looking to find stability in all of that.
Right. And TBR, I love, they look at that as, when those situations happen, when you're dealing with that with the child, asking yourself, is this the child? Is this me?
Yeah.
Is this something related to my history? And we have to be aware of our own history to own our own history, right? And then to make changes.
Oh, yeah.
In unhealthy patterns.
Yeah, that's that, we call it insight, right, in psychology, but it's wisdom, in Scripture. It's like, what's the wisdom where to be able to look inside and go, oh, all the sin, all the brokenness also resides in me. And so I can't control, what's outside of me, but I can deal with this stuff in me and become more like Christ in, we were reading this morning with the boys, like, it's in the suffering, it's in laying our life down that we live. And part of that is our ego and our emotions and the things that we didn't get when we were kids, right. and realizing, oh man, I didn't get that, never going to get it, but now what? How do I get that from God? How do I get that from new friends and new family and new community? Because he's made them in his image to love me and care for me. And then we get to give that to our kids without being so dysregulated.
Yes.
And I think that's
a gift.
Oh my gosh, isn't it? Yeah. But it's hard. And most people, don't even know that that's what's happening.
Right. And it takes time. And I think in our world, and you wrote a book on this literally, but, with technology and phones and things like that, back again to mindfulness, is that we're so distracted. And so a lot of this requires just, full engagement, which is counterculture.
Oh, if you want to talk about narrow way, it's slowing down, getting off your phone, getting off devices, getting off sugar, getting off red dye, or any dyes,
right.
Like literally looking at your life and taking a pause and evaluating and going, okay, I've been doing all of these things just as much as I can. What if I did a little like self-control and minimize some of these and just saw what happened? Could I be more present? And if I'm more present, can I give versus wanting to receive all the time? Or even as adults, like if you're on your phone all the time or eating terrible or always, trying to deal with your pain through these external things, well, then when your kid has a need or is falling apart, how much more likely are you to be patient and be able to connect when you're disconnected yourself emotionally and spiritually?
Not likely.
No.
Yeah.
And I do that. I fail all the time. And I can always realize like, oh man, I wanted convenience. I wanted my kid to be a robot or not to need or, not make me feel like a bad parent, or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
It is.
What else with TBRI? Is there anything that I'm missing?
So, we look at the child as a whole. We've talked about connection a good bit. And then, with empowering, especially when we look at children from hard places, we're looking at just recreating their environment in a way that the child knows that they're safe. So that's called felt safety.
Okay.
So that's really important. Because although a lot of times we as adults may know that a child is safe, however, the child may not feel and experience that they're safe.
Yeah. I think, again, I know we're going on all kinds of tangents, but it's like, that's another word that's been co-opted by society. Like, oh, your safe space, everybody needs to be safe, and it's like, but the reality is what we're talking about is their nervous system.
Yes.
That we have to have things in place where their nervous system is not constantly dysregulated so they can think and learn, and their little tiny prefrontal that barely exists can sort of come in and help, which goes back to the co-regulation. It's like they can't do it. Right? A
not
child,
that they won't.
No,
they
cannot regulate themselves. And so it's so, when you know that, it changes everything.
Yes.
Because even me knowing that, I still think Grady and Jude should regulate themselves sometimes. And then I'm like, no, I have to help them.
Yes.
So can we talk about, can you talk about that safety and nervous system and then, how that co-regulation works?
Yeah. So, with TBRI, we talk about the hand model of the brain, right? So the downstairs and upstairs part of the brain. And, we call it flipping our lid when, our nervous system is dysregulated. And so, when I think babies are a great example to look at, right? When there's a baby who's crying, what do? We come in, we comfort that baby, hold that baby, we meet the need, whatever it is. And so in meeting those needs, that child is actually, their nervous system, their brain is growing and developing, right? That's how God designed us. And so with these children from hard places, they may not have experienced, that type of care and nurture. And so, with co-regulation, we're able to come in with these children a little bit later in life, but still kind of go back to where they were and meet those needs that were not met in those first years of life, to begin to build trust.
Yeah, there's that's where therapy is really helpful within having a parent come in with a foster care kid and work through that reattaching.
Yes.
Maybe sit with them, hold them, put them on your lap. Like there's all this work that can be done, and with your own kid if you've ruptured it or something's happened, there's a divorce. But yeah, I think those are the things that have to happen. But the beautiful thing is you can repair that rupture.
Yes.
Even a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, they long for that nurturing and that attachment. They're looking to fill that void. And it's going to be difficult, more difficult than what, it would have been if they were with you from the start. But you can do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is hope.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So you got connecting. Then we got the kind of co-regulating. What's the last part? The correcting. There we go.
Right. Yeah. And so, with correcting, there's different stages. We call it the ideal response. Whenever we do address behavior, we want to be immediate, address the behavior within 3 seconds, direct. So that's where we want to get on eye level with the child and, have that direct eye contact. The E in ideal, efficient. You want to level your response at the behavior and not at the child. The A, action-based. We call them, behavioral scripts, but you want to keep it as short as possible. But, maybe, hey, would you like to try that again with respect? Yeah. Giving them a redo. And then L, again, you want to level the response at the behavior and not at the child.
That's good.
So, it's that. And then there's different levels of engagement. The first one is going to be your playful engagement. So these are just, if your child's giving you a little bit of sass or, talking back and not doing what, you're asking them to do, it's, hey, would you like to try that again? Right. Hey, are you asking me or are you telling me? And so, or hey, who's the boss here? And so keeping it playful. And then, if that doesn't work, then we can move up to other levels. The other levels will, address those behaviors at a, calming and then, structured engagement, and then calming engagement, and then protective engagement, which you always start with the playful engagement and try to resolve it with as little intervention as possible, right? To path the least
resistance,
right?
Yeah,
right.
because you're because you know that the behavior is a symptom of pain.
Yes.
Right, a symptom of fear, a symptom of protecting themselves most likely, or seeking safety. And so the reality is that if you know that, then you're not taking it personal, you're not being offended, and you're not in a crisis. And so I think those are the things that I try to keep people at. It's like, it's not you know what's the problem. You know, I have people in my office and they're like, I just don't know why they do that. And I'll go, stop saying that. You do know why you do that. Tell me. And then they'll tell me a whole, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, I do know.
Yeah.
But we get in that moment, it's just like, man, it's overwhelming and our brain stops working, which is why I think padding it with all the support and all this education and knowledge before you go into the fight, you know,
yes,
is so important.
And there's a phrase that, you know, with TBRI that caregivers use is that with the child, you know, it's you and me against your history.
There we go. Yeah.
Right. It's not me against you. But we're on the same team.
Which again is something I think should be applied to everybody. You know, externalizing the problem.
Yes.
Like, we're dealing with this anxiety. We're fighting with your trauma from your past. We are, you know, dealing with this neurodiversity or whatever, so that we're externalizing it from you as a person and who you are, because we know that if we labeled this kid or this wife or this husband, they're just going to feel shame, which is going to send them into a trauma response and a protective thing anyway. So we're giving them the thing. We don't want to see this, but yet we're perpetuating the cycle by, you know, labeling.
Right. We want to disarm that fear.
What would you say? Because that's all easy, right? Like, and we can sit here and I can say that's how you should do it. But then you have foster care adoptive children that are violent or aggressive. Kind of how do you help people with that? I mean, I know obviously you work through the TBRI steps, but what are some of the things that maybe you've dealt with or you've seen that that could be helpful for that?
So with kind of your higher level needs and things like that, of course, you know, there are, of course, TBRI, you know, when that's not helpful, you know, we're big proponents of getting counseling and things like that, so that those emotional needs are being, you know, fully made aware and those needs are being fully met.
What do you guys do when there's, like, you know, usually there's another kid in the home that's your bio kid and you've got foster kids in and they're being violent? Like, what's the kind of advice? I'm sure it's case by case, but like, what's the going kind of conversation these days around how much of that you take and how much you don't? Does that just depend on the person?
It depends. You know, different parents have different thresholds of
Yeah.
tolerance, I would say. You know, a lot of times it's, of course, you know, protection is key, right? And so we want to have the home be a safe space for everyone there. And so it may be, you know, just making sure that, you know, if there is a child that's violently acting towards another one, that we remove that child from that situation, not necessarily from the home, but just from that situation, and create some boundaries and safety there. And then, you know, a lot of times it's also, I think that the biological kids in foster homes get left out of conversations.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for those kids to really have a voice and to know that their thoughts and feelings matter deeply. And so I think sometimes it's getting on the front end of that and just kind of having difficult conversations, you know, whether it's between the parents and the biological children or, you know, the parents and the children in foster care, just about, you know, some rule settings and boundaries and different, like we said, different parents have different thresholds. I was talking to one foster parent who, this is not the norm, but she said that one of their foster placements actually broke the nose of their biological son. And she actually said that was the best thing that could have happened for him, because in their family, he was greatly humbled by that experience. And so for this mom, you know, now, is that your typical approach? No, it's not. And so again, it just depends on the family's perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting how quickly as clinicians, and people really, but like perfect harmony is the solution. You know, it's like, that's the thing that we're all trying to strive for, when in reality, the conflict and the crisis is what's sanctifying us. Like, the suffering is the thing that we actually need to grow closer to Jesus and look more like him.
And it is not sanitized. It is messy.
Right.
So messy.
Absolutely. Which I think more of these like podcasts and conversations like are so important for the average person to hear, because you just don't get to experience it, and you don't know what's normal.
Right.
What is normal behavior? I was talking with a buddy on, when was that, Friday, I think, and he's a counselor and younger, and starting out in his career, and so we were just talking about parenting, and they have little kids, and we're sitting there talking. He's like, yeah, my son does this, he's 2-ish, and he's like, and it's just a struggle, and feels like nobody else's kids do what he does, and is this normal? And so we're talking through all of it, and after about 30 minutes, I looked at him and I said, do all of your friends' kids, are they all girls? And he was like, looked up and he's like, oh yeah, they are. I'm like, dude, stop talking to them. Right, what are we talking about? Like, all the stuff you're talking about is such a normal boy behavior. But when you put it in the context of community and you don't have another insider, and again, that's a generality, but the reality is like, of course, when you go to a party with your friends and their 2-year-olds are coloring, and your boy's not coloring, he's going to seem like a maniac.
Yes. Yes.
But it's the same thing with trauma. It's like everything is such a case-by-case basis, and it's so important to not just look at your little sphere of community and go, well, my kid's a problem or nobody else does this. But to like read a book and listen to a podcast and go to a counselor and go to your pastor and go, what's normal overall?
Yes.
Not just what's normal in my little pocket of the universe. Because that could be very skewed based on there's 7 people there. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think community is so important. I think, when we talk about foster parents, that can be a very isolating experience. And so that community among foster parents, locally in Shreveport-Bossier, we have an amazing foster parent community. And I will say throughout the state, that community is growing, which is amazing. Yes. And so they're able, to share stories and to know that they're not alone, right? That their journey is a shared journey. With Connect One Child, we actually launched Connect groups. So these are foster parent support groups throughout the state.
When did that start?
That started in January.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Right. And so, that's a place where we infuse it with some TBRI, strategies and things like that. And it's also just a place where they can come and connect and share. And
this is for the parents?
Yes, for the foster caregivers. Yeah. And so, that community aspect is so important.
To normalize some things.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
It's always nice to hear that, you understand why you want to, run out the room screaming and crying. It's like, okay, I'm not weak. This is hard.
Yes, yes. And just to be in a room with people who get it.
Yep.
And who understand.
What's kind of the goal this next year? Broadmoor Baptist Church, did they open a foster? Have they done that yet?
So the house is... I believe completed. The open house is going to be next weekend.
Nice.
Right. So February 13th and 14th, they'll actually have an open house. But Broadmoor Baptist has, they have some mission houses. And so they've remodeled one into, which will be a family visitation space. So for those who may not know, when children are in foster care, they'll have weekly visits typically with their birth parents and or their siblings that are in foster care and are placed in different homes. And so they'll come together once a week. Usually those visits happen at the DCFS office, which is kind of a sterile environment. And this house will be an amazing resource because visits will be able to take place at this house. And it's designed with families and connection in mind. And they'll also have some foster closet items available too. So it's Shannon Crawford has been leading that ministry, and it's been amazing just to see the church rally behind that need and to champion a space like this in our area.
And so many of those, people like Shannon, have been fighting this for years.
Yes.
Have been pushing this for years. And so to everybody out there who, God is working in their life and they feel like they're, just slugging away at, things, like God is moving and working and it's his timing, and we don't always get to see why that is.
Yes.
Yep. Any closing thoughts, comments? Those are super helpful.
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think that our community has come a long way. What I would love to see in the future of our community is TBRI to be really infused into, our churches, our schools. So really we're all kind of speaking the same language, whether kids come from trauma or have not experienced trauma, where, our primary goal, whether they're at the doctor's office or at, soccer practice, that the primary goal is connection and building trust. I think that's a beautiful a beautiful goal.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working at it as much as I can.
I know.
I would love to see, more churches be trained, more community groups be trained. And I really do think that if the church takes that on and we can have more discussions and not be in these kind of categories of everything psychological is just nonsense, which unfortunately a lot of it is. But it's so beautiful to look at the science and the data and the research and go, oh man, when you actually like live out what Christ is saying and you model your life around what Jesus is teaching with the disciples and to the church, it actually pairs with everything that's trauma informed.
Yes.
And things that are not trauma informed that are under the guise of being trauma informed or helpful,
Isn't
they
it
create
amazing
a mess.
how the science follows the gospel?
Oh, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of validation, for example. God is all about validating you as loved and valued and worthy, but it's because of Him, right? It's not because you yourself have this, intrinsic goodness outside of Him. And it's like that can get twisted up on one side where it's like, well, you're a little sinner and you don't have any worth and you're filthy rags and you just need to, recognize that. And it's like, well, that ignores the gospel. And then you come over here and you're like, well, you're amazing and, you're special and unique and everything that's wrong is because the world's broken and everybody around you is being mean. And it's like, well, without the gospel, that's a problem.
Right.
And so it's the gospel itself is the thing that makes the science and even the text of Scripture come together. I think that's just a beautiful thing that I hope more people look into and more Christians like yourself. Like they're not just a social worker or a doctor or a speaker or a teacher, and then their Christianity is this kind of compartmentalized thing over here.
Right.
They're realizing Jesus was teaching us to be this way all along.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it's awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you guys for listening. I'll link Connect One Child in the show notes and all of Christy's stuff. And y'all have a good week. God bless.